Hey, good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon all, and good afternoon, Councillor Jules Radich. Hello to you, sir.
Hello, how are you, Pat?
Councillor, yeah, good. Councillor Jules Radich and mayoralty candidate for 2022, Jules Radich. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. This is BHN Dunedin. It's a Dunedin special as we talk to Dunedin mayoralty candidates and help me and help others get to know them a bit better and find out what they're all about as we come up to, I think it's the second weekend of October, people voting for their local body mayors and their local body candidates. So hi, thank you. How are you? How's your day been? You've been up, it's a beautiful day in Dunedin today. You've been up to anything exciting?
Look, exciting exciting campaign activity. Just running around doing things, actually.
Are you fixing up many of your hoardings? Are those things being destroyed and taken apart, or is it pretty good here in Dunedin for that not to happen?
I don't think it's too bad. I've had a few defaced and some googly eyes, put on a couple. But in general, they are left alone, which I think speaks to the overall situation in Dunedin. People are pretty respectful and, they leave well alone. So I think overall is good. I hate to tar the majority with, the misdemeanors of a few.
How does a mayoralty candidate get the funds for those hoardings? Because I imagine you've got a couple of hundred hoardings up. I imagine they cost, $10, $15 each or whatever. Where does the money come from for all of that? I mean, I guess I'm asking you to answer that question on behalf of everybody. How does that all work?
Well, everybody, funds themselves. And so, speaking for Team Dunedin, we all put, a considerable amount of money into the pot from the beginning, because we had a big discussion right in the beginning of months ago about what we'd need and what we want to do and how do we want to market ourselves. And putting hoardings up is is one way that reaches all people using the roads. So I think it's important to have a range of mechanisms. So yeah, people put money in and away they go.
So it's basically privately funded, or are you allowed to support them? Like, are you allowed to have a what the Americans will call a super PAC? Are you allowed to have a group outside that actually supports their candidate?
Well, I don't know of anyone that has a super PAC, and certainly we don't. But people do. I mean, anyone accepts donations.
Yeah, right.
So we, we gratefully accept donations, and we've got a place on our website where we allow people to make donations, and some people have.
If you're putting your own money into it in general, do you look at it as an investment? Like, I don't know what kind of money you put into it, but if someone chucked 10 grand in, do you look at that there needs to be a return on that investment? And how do you actually work that? Like obviously some people are going to go and put their own hoardings and billboards up, and they're going to spend whatever, a couple of grand, and they're going to get 0.73% of the vote. So it doesn't seem to be a good return on investment. What kind of return on investment, literal financial investment, do you need to see or needs to happen for you to make the decision, yes, it's worth me jumping in this race?
I often do return on investment calculations, and I certainly have not for this for this campaign or my previous campaign. I think it's rather more like a lottery where you pay your money and take your chances, because ultimately it's a race. And if you can reach enough voters, you can impress enough voters with your message, and they think, yes, I'll give him my vote, then, or her, then you're in. But if not, you miss out. You pay your money, you take your chances.
You say it's a lottery. Like you've been for mayor at least once before, but you've been in council for a while. The last time you ran, you got about 9%, 8.88% of the vote. So when you say it's a bit of a lottery, do you not do polling and that kind of stuff before you make the decision? Do you not kind of get a feel for what the city is thinking and what they're wanting? Or is it literally just a let's give this a crack?
It's let's give this a crack. I mean, the polling, I haven't seen any polling either this term or last term. There are surveys and things done online and by the ODT and that kind of thing, but not genuine polling.
Right.
So at central government politics, they commission, scientific surveys of the population, so they have got polls, but they've got a large amount of funds to pay for that. And to my knowledge, well, in this area, I don't believe any local people do that, or possibly the political parties might. So Green Party and Labor Party might well do polling.
Yeah, now you're part of Team Dunedin. We'll talk about that in a bit, but I'm interested I like American politics. I'm quite heavily involved in, viewing American politics, what's going on there. In American politics, local body politics, i.e. the state level politics, seems to be heavily dominated by what we would consider to be the right, the conservative right, the Republicans. Here in New Zealand, the National Party, which would be sort of the equivalent for the political middle, centre, right, whatever, don't seem to have much of a presence actively in local body politics, but you've already said the Greens and Labor do. It's really an opinion-based question. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the Greens and Labor have gone, we're going to try and get some of our people into local body politics? So the parties on the left here in New Zealand are chasing that, which is the opposite of what we see in America. And National's not doing it. I mean, I'm not asking you to comment on any affiliation for you, but you're in the thick of the weeds. I'm wondering why do you think that is?
The thick of the weeds is a good expression, but no, I'm not part of any political party. I've never been a member of any political party, so I don't know. I mean, it's obviously best addressed to them, and it's only speculation on my part. But I mean, I'd be picking certainly from Labor point of view. They've got a good following, from central government throughout the country, and they have had for a long time. So they've been in and out of power over the decades. So I think it's not surprising that they would look to leverage their database and leverage their marketing mechanisms to help local body politicians get in.
I also think that when you
look at the National Party doesn't do it, actually.
Yeah, well, I wonder as well, because you look at the voting of the country, and often you get more rural areas being blue and more urban areas being red. And so you do see things like the Mayor of Auckland being a former Labor MP. I wonder if that's and the Mayor of Dunedin being a Green Party member, the current mayor. And I wonder if that's what it. I mean, I'm just wondering out loud. You don't need to comment on this, Jules. But I'm wondering
as I said, it's speculation on our part.
Look, speaking of there's a bunch of stuff that I'm talking to all the candidates about, but there's one thing I wanted to specifically ask you about. It's on your candidate profile, because I haven't seen anyone else talking about this. It might seem quite a minor thing for a lot of people, but one of the things you're promising or putting out there is talking about landfill. Landfill alternatives can save us millions. Explain that to me. What do you mean? So this is part of your pitch, why you would be a good mayor. What do you mean landfill alternatives can save us millions? Explain that for me.
Well, Smooth Hill has just been consented. It may well be appealed, but at this point in time, as we speak today, it is a consented landfill. As mayor, it would be my intention not to develop that landfill. I don't mind having it as a backstop if all else fails, but I think and firmly believe that we should be investigating and pioneering even a great many alternatives to landfill before we go there. So in particular, plastics recycling. We have no pioneer plants of any recycling at all. And I think that is poor performance by Dunedin. We are only, we're diverting 19% of our waste from landfill at the moment. The national average, I believe, is 38%. So, we are doing poorly. And there are some relatively easy plastic recycling initiatives that we can install. The first of those is thermoplastic. So anything you can melt down and make into something else, in other words, the hard plastics, surely to goodness we can install a plant very inexpensively to divert all those plastics from landfill. There is a plant in operation in New Zealand making fence posts, and I have proposed right from when I stood for election last time, 3 years ago, and throughout my time in council, that we investigate that. I know private individuals here in Dunedin who have pitched it to the council and talked about it, but there is no enthusiasm from council. So, and by that I mean elected representatives. So
why is there no, in your opinion? Obviously, you are someone who would be enthusiastic about it. So, what I hear you saying when you said there's no interest, and what that means to me is there's no interest in the majority. What do you see them saying for why there's no interest?
Well, I don't know. I just think it's an easy one to commission a report and get going on. But there have been so many other major issues this term. I have, to my shame, I have not put the effort into that particular initiative, but I continue to advocate.
Is it possibly an ecological issue? Is it one of the problems? Like, I don't know the system you're talking about, but in my head, I kind of go, if you're melting down plastics, then that's going to cause, like, for example, smoke or whatever, an offset to it. Is that part of the part of what people are pushing back against it in particular, or anything?
It's only speculation. I don't know what they're thinking.
Right, okay.
I don't know what they're thinking on a number of issues, to be fair, because some of them absolutely mystify me. But so I don't know why. But there is a general reluctance to do that, and it could be part of being primarily concerned. I mean, to be fair, there's only so much staff time available. We have council staff who are busy on waste management, for instance, and you'd have to employ extra people to do that work and do that investigation, and so forth, or commission another private report. But because it's not been the prime concern of anyone in particular in council, nothing's been done, to be fair. And to be honest, it hasn't been my prime concern over the last 3 years, because there's there's other very important initiatives that I have been extremely concerned about.
This is normally a question that I ask in the last 10 minutes of these conversations, but you've just talked about primary concern. One of the questions I ask, and I'll ask it to you now because it fits in, is if you were elected a mayor, what would you achieve in the first 12 months? Like, what would be your primary concern?
Well, two things, I suppose, in the first 12 months. One is retain our one-way system, and two, well, probably a few things, but anyway, two, get the beach sorted out. So that is to have an engineer's report on the reinstatement of the groin, and get the poles on St. Clair Beach reinstated, so that we prevent erosion like we have had this winter on that beach happening again next winter. And that's, I think, critically important for the security of South Dunedin. And, that speaks to a much larger problem that we've got. But, thirdly would be a budgetary review. So exercise some fiscal prudence on the books of the city.
I always find it, cool. I always find it interesting about talking about, trying to hold back nature. Because it seems, all you got to do is go down to St. Clair at the moment and have a look at massive amounts of concrete stairs that couldn't stand up to the weather. I always like, nature wins, it's like you can't really hold it back eventually. I wonder, although I understand how like a barrier can do something, I wonder what are the other alternatives. Do you know if there are any other alternatives to that, or is it basically we try and hold it back, or we have erosion in the beach? Because, as I said, nature typically always wins. Even we can hold it back temporarily, but eventually it's going to win.
Well, that's not entirely the case, because all around the world there are structures in place in the ocean, on the beach, and wherever you like. There's wharves, there's functioning ports, there's marinas, there's all manner of things, structures built in and on the water right around the world in constant use, and they're relatively safe. So I would refute that point. But to me, there are two options for the beach, and they're really straightforward. The problem with St. Clair Beach is that there is a wall. So the sea wall reflects the waves, and those reflected waves scour away the sand. And that's been the case since 1878, when the first wall was built. And every wall since then has been destroyed, and this one is very much under threat. And in 1902, groins were built to protect the wall, and that built up the sand on the beach so that the waves didn't hit the wall, and that then protected the wall, and those groins were replaced, because wooden pole groins are, what would you say? They're a constant maintenance method of building a groin on the beach and trapping sand. But they're entirely appropriate for St. Clair. We can come to that. But so having wooden pole groins on the beach will build up sand on the beach. And, there's lots of photographic evidence for 100 years. And, the sand is still coming onto the beach just last year and the year before through the summer. The northeasterly winds and swells accumulate sand on the beach. And if we have a sand trap, which is what the poles with planks were, then that traps the sand, the beach builds up, and that keeps the waves away from the sand dunes, and that forms a buffer. So that is method one. Method two is to return to a natural beach. And we only have to look a couple of kilometres away to Tomahawk Beach to see a natural beach that has suffered no erosion in the 150 years that we have sort of recorded history of the beach. Now, there's a whole lot of talk currently about people mining the sand. So there is a company mining sand from Tomahawk Beach. And if anything, that proves that the beaches, Tomahawk Beach and St. Clair Beach, the beaches along this coast accumulate sand because sand has been mined off that beach every year for 60 years, yet the beach remains the same. Sure, there's some erosion this winter, but it will accumulate again this summer. So that actively demonstrates for everyone that sand is accumulating on the beach still. So the only thing to do, going back to St. Clair, a little bit of background there. So option one, for $100,000, we build a pole groin. Option two, for $1 billion with a B, we take out the seawall and return to a natural beach. That will work. That's you've got the geography solution, you've got the engineering solution. So,
so just so I'm clear, when you say take out the sea wall, do you mean the Esplanade wall, that massive high wall where the road comes around and the cafes are?
Yes.
That could be taken out because that would have to have obviously a significant slope down there as well, wouldn't it? Or you mean getting rid of all the buildings as well?
Correct. A lot. You have, because the sea line, the sand used to run till Victoria Road. So you have to let the coastline go back to where it was, Victoria Road.
Gosh.
That'll work.
It might work, but I say obviously, I guess I'm being a pessimist. That'll never happen. So it sounds like the obvious solution is the structure. And I was going to ask of the structure. You're talking about wooden structure, and you're saying needs constant, maintenance. Why not a concrete structure? Would that do the same job and be more permanent?
Well, there's a great depth of sand on the beach.
Yeah.
And a concrete structure is an impediment to walking along the beach.
Right.
And it's a pretty ugly thing.
Right.
The poles of the groin are actually quite a romantic, much photographed and beloved art object, on that beach. So it's far more acceptable to have a wooden pole groin. And, a little bit of maintenance every 5 years, so you replace the planks. You'd think the council could do it. But 100 years of history also, in addition to demonstrating that sand accumulates on the beach and is accumulated by a wooden pole groin, 100 years of history also demonstrate that councils are not that good on maintenance, and we have all the South Dunedin flooding to similarly prove that.
Just for people who don't know Dunedin, because obviously this is a Dunedin product for Dunedin people, because we're talking to the potential mayors, but for people who don't know it, when you say it's a romantic thing, let's show them what we're talking about. So this is St. Clair Beach and the wooden poles, and as you can see, people get quite arty with it and make some quite interesting photos, and it's a bit of an odd, slightly sad, but kind of cool landmark for a part of New Zealand.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Hey, well, you brought up the one ways. You are my fourth, I think, because of one person we crossed wires and didn't connect, but fourth conversation. And I'm still yet to understand. Now, to be clear, because last time we talked about this, there was a bit of confusion about the pedestrianisation of George Street one way and the one ways. I'm talking about the one ways, State Highway 1, not the pedestrianisation. We will talk about that, but right now I'm talking about the other one. I still
very easily confused.
Yeah, I'm still not incredibly clear on the reason and rationale for switching the one ways to a two-way. Now, I know that you're not in favor of switching it to the two ways, but I kind of go, before I can sit here and go, either or is the right option as a ratepayer and a voter, I kind of want to understand what the big conversation is. So are you able to unpack that conversation a little bit for us about why this conversation is going on, the pros and cons of going from the one ways to the two ways, as you're being told? I'm not saying you're supporting the two way, obviously, but as you're being told, what is it all about, and why is this conversation going on in council?
I'll attempt to do it concisely and to try and cover both angles. Okay.
Yep.
So the one-way system was installed to allow better traffic flow through the city, and a one-way system, it provides much more flow because you can make right-hand turns or off the one-way system very easily, and you don't have to give way to traffic coming towards you. So all the traffic light sequencing has less rotations. It has less cycles. There are less cycles of the traffic lights, so the traffic flows more. Not only that, the traffic can be synchronized so that you can, and if you drive through Dunedin, it's very common to find that you'll drive from one side of the city to the other along that one-way system in a continuous flow.
Can I just jump in, because I've never thought about this? That basically means a two-way one-way street, if that makes sense, a two-lane one-way street essentially becomes a four-lane one-way street at the lights, because the two straight lanes keep going straight through, and those going left and those going right have their own little bay, and the straight through traffic just keeps on going. So I can see that. Correct. Completely and utterly. Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why it was put in 72 or something like that, and it made a big difference to traffic flow through Dunedin, a dramatic improvement. And it still works well. It has been congested somewhat with Barnes Dance pedestrian crossings, but we'll leave that there. Now, the advantage of going to a two-way system is to slow traffic down and make it easier for pedestrians around Dunedin. And I think that is fundamentally incorrect. But that's just my opinion. I can unpack that further.
I can understand if that was the case. I can understand why people, because for people who don't know us, like one of our, our biggest centralized hub of young people in New Zealand is obviously, in Dunedin, is obviously the university, and this two-way system, which is ultimately the State Highway 1, comes down from the north, goes down into the one-way system and straight past the university. So it's pretty, if you were to say to most people in most centers, State Highway 1, main trunk line right past the university, literally, most people might kind of go, oh, that seems a bit weird, but potentially making that safer would be good. But what I hear you saying, without casting, because I still don't really see the need for it. I don't have a position because I'm not fully informed on it yet, but I'm like, I don't understand what it's all about. But if that's what it is, I understand, as you've explained it, why the rationale.
I've got two important points to make on that. So, because I hadn't quite finished, the idea is that the road in front of the one-way north, which would be the road in front of the hospital, and by that, because the hospital will front towards the city. Towards the Octagon. So that road would become a local road and reduced to 30 kilometres an hour. And supposedly with two-way traffic, that will be better for pedestrians. And I disagree. Anyway, I can come to that. And the road behind the hospital, which is the one-way south, that will remain two ways and remain at supposedly 50 kilometres an hour, which I might point out, the traffic does not travel at 50 kilometres an hour. The average speed is about 37, 38 kilometres an hour. But anyway, that will remain at the higher speed, and that will be a two-lane State Highway 1. Now, the other point that I was going to bring up that I wanted to add into this segment of conversation while I'm on it is that two-lane portion of State Highway 1 at Frederick Street will be joined by all of the heavy traffic from the heavy traffic bypass, which is being created right now along behind the railway station, Ward Street and Wharf Street. Okay. So all of the trucks will then, 2 lanes of them, will then join with the State Highway 1 traffic that will have gone behind the hospital. And so you've got a merge of all the heavy traffic plus all the light traffic, and that double volume of heavy traffic will travel through the university area.
So if it goes to a two-way, it will. That's what you're saying?
That's the plan for going to a two-way. And so what happened in Wellington was that when they converted Willis Street from one-way traffic to two-way traffic, there were a great many pedestrian casualties. In the early stages, there was one death. And in fact, the director of the Wellington Bus Company was run over by one of his own buses because people get used to only looking in one direction on their one-way street and jaywalking, because one of the advantages of a one-way street is that when the traffic stops, it all stops. And so then when you're crossing on the pedestrian crossing, it's much safer. And not only that, you can cross, well, as students are prone to doing, and I certainly did as a student, and still do occasionally, will jaywalk across the middle of the road because the road's all clear. Whereas when it's a two-way street, there's traffic going in both directions. And of course, you're going to have a heck of a lot. You're going to have twice as much heavy traffic along Cumberland Street if we move to two-ways.
Just to tell you from listening about the safety for pedestrians crossing the road and people in Wellington getting hit, not the best argument, because of following that logic, we'd never change any rules of the road. You know, I'm sure there were some when we changed the left-hand turning, right-hand turning rule, a decade ago. If we had to follow that same philosophy, we never would have done that because the people won't remember. So I do understand and acknowledge what you're saying, but I think learning a new skill is not necessarily the reason to not do or do something.
Oh yeah, look, I think that's a valid point. However, in the Waka Kotahi NZTA analysis of the one-way versus the two-way, so, remaining, it's not with the status quo, but with the one-way system versus two-ways, the one-way system came out much safer. So the death and serious injury index showed, their scientific analysis showed that it would be much safer to stick with the one-way system. In addition to that, one last thing to do with that, and just in case we move on, is that it also showed a much better benefit cost ratio, which is, that was quite an important consideration for.
Yeah. And look, a lot of it for me is from a very simple man's point of view that I kind of go, because people have been talking about like how much traffic flow would be. And I think if there's 2 lanes going north and 2 lanes going south on the same road, you don't get more capacity with having 2 lanes going north and 2 lanes going south on different roads. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. To be honest with you, if there was a massive advantage in it, like for example, about the only advantage that I've thought of through these conversations, I don't know if you've seen any of my other conversations, Jules, is the entrance to the hospital. Is there going to be an entrance to the hospital, to the emergency part of the hospital in particular, from both current one-ways? Because if it was from both current one-ways, that negates one of my concerns, which it would make more sense to me to have the entrance to the hospital, especially the emergency department, on a road that can get access to from both directions. So if there's an entrance on both one-ways, then that question goes away, but I don't know yet.
I believe that is the case.
Okay.
Right. And because, as you can hopefully visualize, from either of the one-way systems, either of the one-way roads, you can make a right-hand turn straight into the hospital.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go around the block to get to the other side.
So that's the thing. And I don't have the plans, or I don't know the plans in front of me. So if that's the case, my only question around that was, would it be better to have the hospital entrance on a 2-way street? But if there's entrances from both one-ways, then that's not a question anymore. I do want to talk to you about Waka Kotahi, because I've had this conversation with the other mayoralty candidates, because my understanding is there was a vote within council, and the vote within council was to continue the conversation with Waka Kotahi. And the vote within council was to continue that conversation. And then there was a group of councillors, and I believe it was kind of spearheaded by you, or so I'm told by a councillor I've had on already, to then sort of write a letter or an email to go, I don't want to put the mayor in some kind of kingly position, but sort of above the mayor, above the council's decision, straight to Waka Kotahi and say, some of us aren't happy. So can you expand on that for me? This is what I'm being told by other candidates, so I want to give you the opportunity, especially because you're being identified as sort of the person behind the email, as to what that whole question is about and how you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I am the person behind that email. And so, the mayor wrote to Waka Kotahi, the Chief Executive of Waka Kotahi, and the Minister of Transport, using his position as the Mayor of Dunedin, so representing the people of Dunedin. He said, well, we want to, investigate, we want to keep our discussion around a two-way change for the one-way system. It's version 2, part 3. It's like, so he wanted to keep the conversation focused on converting to two ways. Now, that is completely contrary to the will of the people of Dunedin. And so I organised a letter. I wrote a letter and shopped it round the various councillors who were interested, and we sent that to the same two people, the Minister of Transport and the Chief Executive of Waka Kotahi, and essentially states, well, it's all very well that a group of councillors, the majority of councillors, prefer the two-way, to change their one-way system to a two-way. However, the vast majority of the population of Dunedin prefer to keep the one-way system. And so we have 3 polls that show that, and Waka Kotahi's own poll demonstrated that. So it is our duty as councillors to represent, the views of the population. And what we've got here instead is the Mayor and his group of councillors that have a majority in the council representing their own view to the government as though it comes from the people of Dunedin, when it very clearly does not.
I'm interested into the process of this, and I've got the process of the letter being sent. I've brought up your.
So we did not. We didn't oppose. We opposed that letter, but the letter got sent, and so we didn't. That just happened. So that's that. However, there's absolutely nothing to stop a group of other councillors representing the population of Dunedin and alerting the minister to the fact that 90% of the population in the Otago Daily Times poll were strongly for retaining the one-way system. They are very much against, changing that road system. And Waka Kotahi's own poll showed 76% in favour.
It was reported in the ODT that the email being sent to Waka Kotahi was a clear abuse of process. I'm assuming what that means is we have a democratic process. We put councillors and mayors in place for local body politics. They make the decisions. We don't like the decisions. We vote them out. How do you feel? So I've asked the other councillors this as well. I look at your Team Dunedin news, right?
So I should address that. Let me address that question for start.
Well, I'm not. Let me wrap this up, and then I'll give you the space to. I'm not going away from the clear abuse of process. I'm not going away from that. What I'm just saying is, on your Team Dunedin page, which you're a part of, which I want to talk to you about as well, you use words like integrity, accountability. We were not behaving properly. Fairness, honesty. These sorts of words. I'm wondering about the process of having the minority view within council for this particular issue. Sort of, and look, these are my words, and I am being a little bit flippant. Chuck their toys and go above the head of the council and say we're gonna make our views clear anyway. That doesn't feel like, unless I'm missing something that I'm happy for you to explain to me on. It doesn't feel like integrity. It doesn't feel like appropriate way to do it. Basically, because what that leads into is, well, so you can ignore any process and do whatever you want anytime if you can do it with this. So now the floor is yours to explain.
Absolutely, and the number one thing I'd say is just flip that on its head. To me, the clear abuse of process here is the mayor using his majority in council to misrepresent the views of the public of Dunedin.
But when you say his majority, don't you mean the majority?
Well, he doesn't own his point of view.
Sure, but he doesn't. But they can vote however they want. He doesn't control them. So when you say his majority, you're talking about the majority, correct?
The majority, yep.
Okay.
The majority of councillors, the majority of council is not representing the views of Dunedin, and this is a very critical. This is a very critical decision for the economic and social future of Dunedin, and also of the whole region, because of the transit times and everything else, and the safety factors through that one-way system. So the abusive process comes to when a group, a majority of council have one idea, and it is completely contrary to the wishes and the clearly stated opinions of the people of Dunedin. So I think that is where the abusive process comes. And I think it's beholden on me and the others that voted with me to stand up and be counted for the people of Dunedin and represent those wishes.
The difficulty you face, and look, obviously I've just said to you, to be honest, I prefer the one-way system. So I'm not asking you these questions based on supporting that view that you're talking about, because it doesn't really make sense to me to switch it. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
But the difficulty you face, and I was writing down these things as you were saying them, is when you start saying things like contrary to the will of the people of Dunedin and the views of Dunedin, is if you're mayor, right? Yeah, you're mayor, and the ODT ran a poll about would you like your rates reduced by 50%, and the will of the people, 98% said yes, and 8 of the councillors said yes, you would be in the same position and you would have to go against the will of the people. So I find when you use this, not you particularly, but when one, because you're not the only person, when one uses the example of we need to follow the will of the people, it comes across as a little, it's either naive or it's purposefully deceptive, because we all know that when it suits the ends of the person telling the narrative, it's a great thing to say, but when it doesn't, they'll happily make rules and laws and legislation against the will of the people. And so I have a problem with that being used as a defense, because the other thing about the ODT in itself, that's not representative of Dunedin. So the ODT is not representative of Dunedin. And so why did we put any weight in that anyway? To actually get that data, you probably need to then pay for scientific research to go in and see what people are saying, explain the whole situation, because you appreciate this, Jules. It's almost a little bit like when did you stop beating your wife conversation. If you put up a big story about, this terrible one-way thing, you vote for it. Of course people don't. So I think that I want to know, and I'm hopefully we're doing it today, and I'm already getting people coming in like Rochelle has said, let me bring it up on the text. Thanks for asking. That's what we're talking about right now. I read the same thing. The ODT sounds like a council process wasn't followed. I want to know the information. I want to be able to pass on the information, so then people can understand why.
Yeah. Well, look, the council process was followed, and the mayor wrote his letter.
Yeah, but my question to you, or my point that I'm making, is the will of the people thing. If you put that out there now publicly to me, then if you were mayor at any stage, if you didn't follow the will of the people, you're going to have me and other people going, hang on, you made this noise very, very clearly about following the will of the people.
No. Look, you're taking one situation and transposing it over to another, and that's improper, and it's not fair, and it's not an appropriate.
No, it's fair. No, I'll tell you why it's fair. I'll tell you why it's fair. Yeah, no, I'll tell you why it's fair, and then you can continue on. It's fair because in this instance, you using the will of the people suits your end. In another instance, it won't. So I'm just literally talking about the will of the people being used as a reason for the decision being wrong.
At any time, the ratepayers who want to express their will about the rates rises or anything else can and do. And so in this situation, the decision has not been made by Waka Kotahi. So that we're still speaking, so there is certainly a split of opinion through Dunedin, and if the other side of if the majority side of that opinion is not being represented to Waka Kotahi, then that is inappropriate. Waka Kotahi has got a 600-page report that they commissioned that shows their preference is for keeping the two-way system. So, and to purport that the people of Dunedin prefer the one-way system is an abuse of process. And writing a letter to present the other point of view is a perfectly reasonable thing to do as a politician. This is not a letter coming from staff. This is not a staff letter countermanding something that has been done by the councillors or handed down by the mayor. Yet we've written that letter. It would be an abusive process if a staff member had done that. But as politicians, we are here to represent the people, and we are representing, in this case, a majority of people. So it is perfectly appropriate. And furthermore, that position was vindicated by an editorial in the ODT just this week.
I
Did
guess
you
my
read that
preface.
editorial?
No, I have not read the editorial.
Okay.
My preface, I guess, my point that I'm making about the majority of New Zealand is you actually have no evidence for that. An internet poll on an ODT website is not taken as evidence, right?
Well,
Because
neither is the two other polls that were taken. So no survey has done, but
sure,
it is important to alert the decision makers in Wellington who are remote from the situation.
That some people in Dunedin don't like this. And you can say that some people. So do you do that for every decision that some people don't like this, and you make sure that other people know that some people don't like this?
For some decisions, but no, largely there's not many other decisions that are as important for Dunedin's future as this. And I think it's an abusive process to use a majority in council to purport to represent the views of Dunedin.
So my question for you about
indication. Have you talked to any men on the street about this?
I'm a man. I'm a people in the street. I'm a man on the street. Right. I live in Dunedin. I drive the one ways all the time. This is my hometown. Yeah. So yes, I talk to me all the time and all the people around me. So I'm not phoning in from Auckland to have this conversation with you. My actual point over this whole thing as well is, would you be mayor if this exact similar situation happened to you? I don't think you'd be like, nah, sweet as, yeah, put out that information. And I don't think it's if someone for whatever reason went around the due process and went above your head and made noises about it and made, I don't think, like, one of the things that I noticed is, and I think it was Councillor Lord, and I wrote this down, this has come out of the ODT. Councillor Lord, this is when I was talking to a different candidate, but Councillor Lord who agreed in general with your side points, but didn't sign the letter saying that undermining a council decision would be wrong. So Councillor Lord, who agrees with you, says undermining the decision is wrong. And I guess what I'm asking you is when you're mayor and others undermine the decision that you've made, how will you handle that is what I'm asking you.
Well, we didn't undermine the decision. The decision went ahead. The letter was written. That decision was taken. Their letter was written, and away it went. I didn't write a letter to say, this is a majority of council, and I think this is a minority of council. And the position, the anecdotal evidence and the poll, the survey evidence shows that the majority of people in Dunedin do not want to lose the one-way system. And, that was clear in the letter. And it is important that, those views of a great many people in Dunedin are represented to central government, unless they get the idea that everyone in Dunedin is all in favour for ditching the one-way system, because that is the tone of the letter that the mayor wrote. And
sure. So my question actually wasn't about the decision, Jules. My last question of this part of the conversation was about, would you be mayor and another group of minority councillors did the same thing on another issue? That's my question. How would you handle that, what some call undermining the process would be? How would you handle that as mayor? I'm not really interested in debating the one-way, two-way, good idea. I've already said I don't see the need to go to two-way. I'm now wanting to know, if I vote for you and you're the mayor and you've got council members undermining things that the majority of the council is doing it, how as mayor would you handle that?
Well, as mayor, I would run things quite differently. I believe in a thing called constant kōrero. And so active listening and building consensus before taking positive action to, work in the best interests of the people. So I have used this process throughout my working and sporting life for team building and achieving consensus results in business and in sport and in life in general. So taking cognizant of the other people in the room, because we've got a situation where you've got 14 councillors are sitting around a table, and because a group has the majority, their views hold sway and no other correspondence will be entered into. So I simply don't operate that way.
But I what you're saying, so
you want to put up a conjecture possibility, and I don't, we'll cross that bridge. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I'm not going to speak to some conjectural or speculative argument that you don't have any of the detail around, because every big decision that is ever made by me as mayor, by us as a council is nuanced. There's very little that's black and white. So every decision is nuanced, and taking the people with you as the leader, or with me as the leader, is very important. So,
but it's not always, but it's not always possible. I mean, I wrote down the word consensus as you were saying it. I wrote down the word sporting, your sporting background. You know, in a sport, in a game of something, in a game of rugby, there's not always consensus. There's a winner and there's a loser. Doesn't matter how much we use buzzwords like consensus and bringing people along and korero and that sort of thing. At times, there's going to be a faction saying one thing and a faction saying another thing who is a minority. And what I'm asking you is not a hypothetical about a particular incident. It's if you are the mayor and you have a faction who are a minority and the decision has been passed, if they were to undermine that decision publicly, how would you handle that? The response is not, I would get a consensus, because what I'm saying to you is there's going to be times when you are mayor that you will not always have a consensus, that you will have some people rallying against that. And I don't think it's a hypothetical to ask you. I think it's perfectly valid, because what it tells me, Jules, is your leadership style, who you are as a person, and if you deserve my vote or to be ranked in the system at all. And that's a part of it that you asking me, am I talking to the man in the street? I am the man in the street. And I am asking you the questions that other people are going to look to as well to find out if they want to vote for you. If what you're basically saying is, I'm not going to answer that question, I'm not going to enter that's a stupid question, fine, we'll move on. But that also tells me something about your leadership style.
Yeah. So in the parallel situation for some other future thing as to whether drink bottles are all going to be mandated to be black or mandated to be red.
Sure.
And then we have a majority of council are going for black, and some people want to have red. And if I write to the minister and say, we've all decided, majority has decided that we would like to have black, it's their decision, government to make. It's perfectly reasonable that other people say, well, and they may purport to represent a majority of the population of Dunedin as well. It's perfectly reasonable as politicians that they write to the minister, and they do exactly the same. So my point is, I don't think that is undermining my decision. What would be undermining decision if the staff of the people who are, tasked with carrying out the decisions, they undermined it. So if the mayor had written his letter and there it was, and then the staff had sabotaged that letter or written another letter with it to say, no, this is not correct, that is a completely different story. That is undermining the mayor and the majority of council's decision. Me as a politician writing to present the alternative view and purporting to represent the actual majority of Dunedin is a perfectly reasonable political response. And if the tables were turned, and I'm advocating for the one-way system, and a councillor in opposition says, no, we want to slow the town and have two-way roads, then it's perfectly reasonable to purport to represent whoever they say they're representing, and then it's beholden on the person or the ministry or the body making that decision to investigate further to decide where their decision is going to go. Because at the end of the day, it's Waka Kotahi who are making that decision. And one would hope that they are taking the views of the population at the receiving end of that decision into account. And therefore, it's important that those views are represented to them. So back to the original question, if councillors in opposition wrote a letter opposing my majority of council saying one thing and they said, no, we think it should be another, that's perfectly all right. They're politicians.
So you'd be okay with that as the answer to your question?
Correct.
You'd be okay with the minority, what some are saying, undermining the process. I know you don't agree with that word, but what some are saying.
I don't agree with that terminology. Okay. And I took the Otago Daily Times to task for repeating the mayor's comments, because it is not an abusive process. And as I have said, the abusive process is purporting to represent the majority of Dunedin, when I clearly do not agree with that. I don't think that is the case. And the spot polls that we have, not scientific surveys agreed, but all of the polling that has been done demonstrates it.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, like, just as a little side note, an addendum, looking at polls on an internet website, even if it's a news internet website, they're not, I mean, like, for a start, the majority of people who, interact and access the ODT are going to be older, are going to be ratepayers, are going to be these people. They're not going to represent the majority. It would also be fascinating to know how many votes came in that poll. Was it 10,000? Was that, because really, so anyway, look, that's what I'm just saying about those things.
I accept that, all those
not
points
evidence.
I accept,
Yeah.
no question.
Hey, look, thank you for that. And thank you for nutting that out with me for a little bit. Talk to me about George Street and the pedestrianisation zone. Where do you sit on that?
I strenuously opposed the change of George Street to a one-way traffic situation, supposedly at 10 kilometres an hour. Is that what you mean?
How come? Yeah, and also, so that's what I'm talking about, the pedestrianisation, making it more pedestrian friendly, making it one way, slowing the speed for just a sector of George Street.
Yes. Well, it's all of the shopping centre. Yeah, so I disagree with that. And I think it is fundamentally wrong. And, if you're to look to the actual report we had from the independent consultant who reported on it.
Yep.
He says that there's it exposes the possibility of financial failure. It makes the street much more dangerous after dark, and that is borne out by the crime situation at Cuba Street in Wellington and even Fort Street in Auckland. And the lack of access for shoppers will be a problem. And I think that there is a significant issue with parking in the town, which, the one scientific poll that we do have, which is the Residents' Opinion Survey, that has categorically shown that the population of Dunedin are very dissatisfied with parking in the CBD. So that is the one scientific poll that is actually done in Dunedin.
Why do you think that is? Well, I mean, no, sorry, that was a stupid question. What's the solution to, because if we're already unhappy with parking in the city, what's the solution to that then? Because obviously this won't help that, because it's not going to be a huge amount, but it might be 30, 40, 50 parks, I'm guessing, that get lost. So what's the solution to
several hundred.
Is it that many? How far is, I'm just trying to find the map. How far is the actual pedestrianisation zone?
No, you see, you're zeroing in on George Street, but there's a lingering disgruntlement and with the lack of parking, which really stems from the cycle lanes on the one-way system.
Oh yeah, but I'm talking about I'm asking about the pedestrianisation for what the new plan's going to be.
So look, you're blending the two things there. So just come up with one question and we'll answer that.
Well, my question is, what's the solution to parking in the system right now? I guess, but just so you know, it's based around the pedestrianisation solely of George Street is not going to be the difference of several hundred parks. It's going to be the difference of several dozen parks, maybe. But in general, what's the solution for parking in the city? Should Dunedinites actually think it's not good enough? Okay,
so solution for parking in Dunedin. That's what we're talking about?
Yep.
So my solution is a multi-storey car park somewhere on the fringe of the CBD.
Like where? Give me a point. At which end? Like if the Octagon's in the middle, when you say on the end, where you're talking? So don't even worry about available land. Imagine you can just have any spot you want.
It's already a car park on the ground floor at just diagonally across the railway line from the farmers market. There's a St Andrew Street car park. It takes about 250 cars right now.
Gotcha. Yep. No, you mean.
And it's already asphalted. And I think there should be multi-stories of car park there with an overhead walkway straight into the second floor of the new hospital.
Okay.
And so that would not only give you commuter parking for the city, but it would give you also any parking you want for the new hospital. So patients, visitors, nurses, orderlies, all of the people that work at the hospital will be able to have parking right there, and they'd have safe and secure transit from the car park to the hospital. Because what happened in Christchurch is that it took a nurse to be assaulted at night before something was done about the parking situation for the hospital.
Right.
Now, we're under an ideological blanket discrimination against cars, thinking that people are going to get rid of their cars and get onto public or active transport. Now, that's a philosophical argument. It's an ideological argument. And in order to make the one-way system, if they change this to two ways, there needs to be a really significant mode shift, apparently to at least 40% from the 24% we have now. We're relatively high as far as alternate mode transport goes in Dunedin because so many students walk to and from. But to shift to 40%, and not only that, there's a hope that it would shift to 50%. That is a colossal mode shift. So Dunedin doesn't lend itself that well for cycling. I think the cycle lanes are being used more than what they have been, but it doesn't lend itself well for cycling because we have the weather and we have the four seasons in one day in the middle of summer. So, and we've also got the hills. Electric bikes are helping, but I just don't see that we're going to have a huge shift to cycling. But, it's been going for a few years now and uptake is pretty slow. Similarly, we're not going to move to big old buses. The price of buses has plummeted down to $1 a trip, and only the long distance buses are full. All other buses still remain mostly cold air. So, there needs to be, I don't think there's going to be a big move away from cars. And the underlying philosophy of how that move away from cars is supposed to be achieved is by removing the convenience of cars. And we've seen the removal of many car parks from the inner city. And all that's doing is endangering the commercial viability of the CBD, of that George Street. Now, that is a fundamental error, and it is fundamentally wrong. That George Street shopping area exists for shopping. And so to try and turn it into some playground that, that's just looking with envious eyes that people want to go and hang out there because other people are coming there for shopping. The primary function of that street is shopping. So looking after those shops should be job number one for council. So to ensure their commercial survivability. So, and by parking on the periphery, so at that St Andrew Street car park, that would service commuters. And by commuters, that is to say the people who work in shops and the people that come to town and park for the whole day. And if they were to park there, coupled with a small electric loop bus, which I simultaneously propose, that would give us inner city commuting ability. That would give us convenient and reliable inner city transport. So people will be able to take that bus from the car park to their place of work, anywhere from the Exchange through to Albany Street on Princess George Street and around in a big rectangle.
Can I just jump in? Because I'm thinking it through just saying it, yeah? It's like I feel what you're saying down by where the railway station is quite a long way, say, from the mall, the main mall in Dunedin, for walking, right?
Yeah.
And if what you're saying is that George Street area is set up for shopping, that says to me, if you're doing that shopping, you want your car quite close. Because if your car's not going to be close because your car's not available to put your shopping in, then does it matter whether it's a one-way system at only 10 k's an hour because your car's not close anyway?
Who did I say the car park was for?
The people who are working there and stuff.
Yes.
Like the workers.
The commuters.
Yeah, commuters.
Yeah. Well, you're now talking about shoppers. I haven't got to shoppers yet.
Okay. Do you want to tell us about shoppers?
So I've talked to you about commuters and I've talked to you about how they're going to get across town. Yep. And now I'm going to talk about shoppers.
Go for it.
Because there is quite a bit of parking in town that is being used by commuters right now. So, for instance, the Meridian Mall car park, there's quite a lot of leased car parks for commuters.
Right.
But if it was convenient and reliable for them to get from a more distant and cheaper car park, then those inner city car parks would be more available for shoppers. We have the same situation in the DCC-owned Great King Street car park, and there are other car parks around in the inner city in a similar situation. So the thing is, I'm not very worried about car parking on George Street. George Street, car parking should only be for pick up and drop off and good service access and, mobility access and ambulance access and fire engine access and that kind of thing. Pick up and drop off in particular, but it's not there for parking to go and do some shopping. But parking on the side streets can be. So, for instance, the number one shopping area in Dunedin is in the Meridian Golden Centre Wall Street Mall, and that's all undercover. But having car parks on those side streets is helpful, and having covered car parks, which there are quite a number of them within that building already, available for shoppers, will make a difference to how people view shopping. And
so come back to me. So that means what I'm hearing you saying is the pedestrianisation of George Street. A downside from that is not the parking, because losing those parks purely from the pedestrianisation of George Street, you're already saying that's not the place where the workers go, and it's people should only be parking there for picking up and dropping off. And if people are going into the mall, they're going into the Meridian Mall car park or the side streets. So that's not a concern. It sounds like you're saying that the actual parking on George Street, if it was to be pedestrianised, is not the concern. So what? Because for me, like, I'll be honest, I love the idea of this kind of Cuba Street type area. I do wonder again about our weather, if like people would use it 3 months of the year and that'd be it. But I also know that if I wanted to go to 2 degrees and couldn't get a park right outside, I'd be like, oh, fucking this pedestrian area, whatever about this, I'd rather park outside. So I can I'm a bob both way kind of guy on this. But most of the response I've heard from people who are against it are about parking. But what you seem to be saying here is that's not where most of the parking happens anyway.
That's right.
So that's not one of the concerns with it.
You still want 5 and 15-minute convenience parking on George Street.
Yeah.
So there are people, and sounds like you're one, that will want to park for 5 or 10 minutes, go in, do your business, get out, and they're gone. So, that's important to retain that. But it's not the be all and the end all. It's not people's biggest grizzle about the parking situation in the CBD.
Because just looking here at these photos, or the imagery, sorry, not photos, you can see that in the one-way system, there are still those 5-minute, 15-minute, whatever these ones on the side are, parking, these parking spaces, that they still exist. So really it's not about those quick duck into I don't know, whatever store and pick up your takeaways or whatever that is. It's about other things. And I guess that kind of loses me a little bit, because for me, it's always been about thinking the biggest downside of this would be the parking, primarily and only to do with the pedestrianisation, not to do with parking over all of Dunedin, but just to do with that area of George Street they're talking about doing this to.
Well, I think we need an integrated transport solution. And so when I think about parking, I'm thinking about the whole of the inner city area and how all that's managed and what the future is likely to be.
Just so you know, I think there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek here, Jules, but Pursuit has said multi-storey car parking would free up space for the pedestrianisation of George Street. Well done, Jules. So there you go, on board. But that kind of almost, if it solves the problem of parking, then that's one of the issues taken away from the pedestrianisation of George Street. I mean, even though I think there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek there, that's actually a truth there as well.
Yeah, look, ultimately, I'm not opposed to the pedestrianisation of George Street, but there's, and I've been in lots of pedestrianised places around the world, and the thing that I noticed, and I had one particular example which gave me a great surprise when I encountered it, was in Reims in France. Mm-hmm. So Reims is where the Champagne district, and I stayed there in a hotel right in this big pedestrianised area, and it's covered in tables and chairs from restaurants and cafes and people all out on the street. It was, it was busy. But it turned out that underneath that mall area, that big open area, there were 2 floors of car parking.
Yeah, right.
So people are parking right there. Very accessible, very easy. And so it's very convenient. And so the critical thing with public transport the critical thing with public transport, in order to have an attractive mode shift that people engage with and take up that mode shift rather than being forced into it, is to make public transport convenient and reliable. Hence, I want to have a small electric bus called Dunedin Tramways going round that loop and then spreading out from there.
With your logistics, you'd probably want 2 or 3 of them, wouldn't you? I mean,
it would not be one vehicle, no.
Yeah. You said a bus, but you're meaning a bus route. Gotcha.
I mean,
Hey,
have you been to Melbourne?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you've been to Melbourne, been to the city, you know the city circle line.
And just jump on, jump off. That would be your plan. So paid for by the council, basically paid for out of rates.
Well, that remains to be seen. I personally favour starting with a gold coin, but we'll see how that goes, and just see what people, how people react to that.
Hey, just on the transport thing, talking about buses, because a few people have mentioned this in our conversations. People talking about a train or a bus, a better system between Dunedin and Mosgiel. It's not something necessarily I've seen you pushing hard yourself, but because we're talking specifically about, public transport and stuff now, do you have any other thoughts around public transport around Dunedin? What you would like to help bring in? Would you be mayor?
Well, it's a nice idea that we have a train from Port Chalmers and a train from Mosgiel. The possibility exists, and I think the number one precursor to having such a train would be the inner city loop bus.
Right.
Because the thing is, once people get into town, it's critically important they have convenient, reliable transport to get around. And so if you've got a good, reliable inner city loop bus that you can get from work to your shopping, I mean, that loop bus would mean that people working at one end of town, for instance, ACC and Dowling Street, will be able to shoot up to the Meridian Mall and eat in the food court and go back, easily and within time. It's only a few minutes to get from one end of town to the other. So, and similarly, it would provide a considerable degree of student safety, which is a problem that does concern me.
Right.
And also, you get mobility right around town. And of course, when it comes to visitors, so when someone comes down from you get a visitor from Hawke's Bay, comes down, they can, park, or they may have just flown in, get a taxi from the airport, and then they've got their inner city travel, museum, art gallery, Toitu, etc., all taken care of, restaurants, cafes, anywhere they want to go, all around that inner city. It makes it very easy.
Why did you pick Hawke's Bay? Often people reference places that they've got something to do with for some reason. So why did you pick particularly someone visiting from Hawke's Bay out of interest?
It's a Metro magazine reference.
Okay.
You ever heard of Metro magazine?
Yeah, of course.
They always talked about a visitor from Hawke's Bay. The man on the Clapham bus, I'd say a visitor from Hawke's Bay. That's all.
Let's talk about
I have lived in Hawke's Bay, and it's a very nice place.
Let's talk about Three Waters. It's very clear that you are against the centralisation of Three Waters. I'm reading off your candidate profile here. Infrastructure is essential and must receive greater priority, while Three Waters should remain in local control. We've got 10, 15 minutes if we need to talk about this. It's one of the big kind of 3 or 4 issues for mayoralty candidates. Tell me about your thoughts around Three Waters and why.
Well, I think the government's got it all wrong, and I think it's doomed to failure, really. And so,
but why? Why? Give us the
solution. And the solution is to have local ownership, catchment administration, and national standards. So, it all comes down to what is their objective with Three Waters, and surely it is to have national standards for storm waste and fresh water.
Yeah.
And if you want to, and so we have got a new organisation set up called Te Mata Arawai. And, one of the things that they embrace is Te Mata Otawai. So that's a really good pair of, I suppose, initiatives, concepts, and, organisations to regulate Three Waters. Now, this idea of we chop the South Island into one, but most of it, not all of it.
Yeah, Marlborough.
It's like it doesn't fit. There is no network interconnectivity between here and Nelson, let alone here and Oamaru. But to me, catchment administration does make sense. So an Otago Southland model has all of the lakes, all of the rivers rise at the southern lakes and flow down to the sea. And south or west to the sea. And then for Christchurch or for Canterbury and the West Coast, the lakes rise in the Southern Alps, the rivers rise in the Southern Alps and flow to the sea. And then Nelson Marlborough, similarly, they rise in the Nelson Lakes and the mountains there and then flow northwards to the sea.
So let me ask you this: it's just to not to expedite the conversation, because we can talk about it, it's fine. But it sounds like what you're saying is a smaller, centralized model would be okay with you, like Otago, Southland, Canterbury, I guess Nelson Bays, as opposed to a bigger centralized group, which wouldn't work in your opinion. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, and it wouldn't work because the lack of connectivity and the lack of local control, and as soon as Invercargill might be a bit suspicious. Naturally the headquarters would be in Dunedin, but because we're the biggest city, but they might be a bit suspicious of, Dunedin looking after their water. However, it's not that far to get on the phone or trot up here and talk to us, and vice versa. It's you can go and visit Invercargill.
But isn't that exactly the same argument that we can say? Because I'm assuming if it was the major South Island idea, whatever that's called, Area 3 or Area 4, the head office would probably be in Christchurch, and it's not that far. You drive up the road to Christchurch. Isn't that exactly the same argument?
No,
purely for the governance of it, as you've said about the difference between Invercargill and Dunedin. It seems to me that's the same argument for Dunedin to Christchurch.
Well, no. I don't agree, because it's nuanced. It's like so many things, as I made the point before, all these big decisions are nuanced. And I don't have any, we've got a long history of rivalry between Christchurch and Dunedin, or, Crusaders and Highlanders, whereas we've got a long history of, largely cooperation between Otago and Southland.
So you're saying you don't trust the Cantabs, basically?
Yeah, correct.
I like the honesty. So they're the dirty Cantabs. You're saying, get away from my water.
Yeah, and they don't want to have to be looking after us. And you'll find that the people in Christchurch have very little regard. As I made this point at an early Three Waters meeting, they don't want to look after Clevedon or any of those outs.
But hang on. But so
you're making after Waipara, let alone Waipahi.
Okay. So you're making claims, and it's good to test claims. They don't want to look after. What do you mean by that? How do you know who? You're basically saying that the people who were to cover off like the area, the 4 area, the mostly of the South Island, they'd have nefarious actions towards Dunedin. I assume that's an opinion. But what are you saying when you say they don't look after? What's your metric for that? How can you justify that statement so we all know?
Well, that's an opinion, and it's based on the catchment idea, because they're using in Canterbury, they're using water from the same source, and that water is flowing through a range of communities. And so people are mostly, this is just a general observation of human nature, they're more concerned with their own patch. But if there's interconnectivity between the neighbouring patch and then further and further away, and it's still on the same stream, just as it was if there was a dam and the hydropower was all coming down the line, the people in Christchurch are concerned about that dam and the connectivity with that. And if they're concerned about their fresh water, they're concerned about the lakes in the Southern Alps and the rivers, and looking after that water as it comes all the way down to the city. So there's natural catchment areas for water, for fresh water in the first place. And similarly, they don't want the communities upstream putting their wastewater into the rivers that they're drawing from downstream.
Well, hang on, but hang on, just for clarity. Who's suggesting all of a sudden the way and the places the wastewater is going to go is going to change? Should they be one entity and they don't want the ones upriver doing it? That would be how it's already happening now. No one's talking about changing the system, and all of a sudden, all these other upriver places are going to be putting their waste into this river that you now belong to. I don't.
No, golly, there's not a conspiracy theory here. The system is changing. At the moment, there is discharge into water.
Sure.
There's wastewater discharged into water, and the system is under pressure for change to discharge to land, right? To keep all wastewater away from water.
Mm-hmm.
So and to constantly be cleaning up the waterways. And so my point is that people downstream have got a vested interest in the people upstream looking after the same body of water that is flowing from up to down, from up the hill to down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense to do water, all three waters, in a catchment model, so that there is administration across the whole catchment. So it's just from a purely engineering logic perspective is where I come from.
I can see what you're saying. I'm just struggling to get the actual logic behind it, because if head office was in Christchurch, let's just say, and yet the catchment for water for Otago and Southland is, let's say, up in Queenstown, up in the Alps and coming down our way, whether the head office is in Dunedin, the people up the river are still the same people up the river and down the river. It's not like the people, if it gets controlled by Christchurch, it's not like all of a sudden those people who are controlling it in Christchurch can add waste up in Queenstown to come down into Otago. I don't know. I don't, not that I don't get it. I understand what you're saying. It just feels, because the same argument could be made by Invercargill. We don't want those
dudes. But hang on.
Yeah.
By your logic, we won't, let's just get rid of all local government. Let's have nothing done locally. Let's have everything ratcheted home to Wellington. All decisions about everything get made in Wellington, and they control the lot.
But at the moment,
I could be made redundant immediately. And similarly, yourself, what are you doing here? You can be talking, you could be sitting in Wellington. Why bother being in Dunedin? We shouldn't have any radio generated, no programs generated in Dunedin. They should all be done in Wellington. Everything should be Wellington. In fact, we've got a Radio New Zealand, national radio. Gosh, they should be the one and only station to do anything.
I think what you've unfortunately come across with your little example here is pretty much all radio does come out of Auckland or the major centres. There's very, very little in local areas because they do feed it from a centralised hub out. But the point of this is some of those things are controlled by central government. Some decisions are out of local body hands and some aren't. The question is this: should this be or not? So the baby with the bathwater idea you just said then is obviously a bit silly and nonsense, because there are already lots of things that are controlled by the central government, and there are lots of things that are controlled by local body government. What we're asking is, should Three Waters be one of those things controlled by central, which is currently being controlled by local? It's not, should we just give everything to central government? So, I know you're being a bit facetious, and maybe your tongue's in your cheek a little bit as well, but no one's suggesting that. And it's not a particularly helpful response, to be honest, if we're trying to figure all this out. And I want to know again who you're going to be.
You're busy telling me that Christchurch should be controlling us, and I disagree.
I didn't say that at all. I'm asking you. I'm saying you don't want Christchurch controlling us. At no point have I said. In fact, I've done the research on this, spoken to several people within council and outside council who aren't running for mayor, so I didn't pick me up with the bias, and got a very clear explanation as to where we are on Three Waters right now, and very clear as to what's going on and what's needed and what's not needed. So actually, I haven't said that I'm for Three Waters at any point. What I've responded to is your position on Three Waters. That's what I've done here. And I'm trying to work it out. And to me, the argument of catchment means we should be together and we don't trust Canterbury. And even though Invercargill won't trust us, that's okay because we're mates. It doesn't fill me with a huge amount of confidence about how this decision making is going to be made. Would you be mayor in charge of Three Waters?
Well, the trust in Canterbury, etc., is somewhat facetious and tongue in cheek. But the fact is, they do not have the vested interest in our water that they do have.
But you keep saying they. Hang on. But you keep saying they. But it's like it's three guys who live in Christchurch who are going to have all the power. I mean, there are already multiple things in our society that are centralised and controlled from one area, and it's not like they go, "Oh, I'm in Hamilton, so let's do Waikato first." There is, if someone's job, if someone's, what they do is supply a good or a service for an area, then that's their job. I don't quite get you. It's not a conspiracy theory, but you're continually talking about them in Christchurch and they've got a vested interest. It sounds like what you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, sounds like what you're saying is those people who live in Christchurch, they are going to look after Christchurch first, no question, no ifs, ands or buts about it, and we'll get the dregs. That does sound like a conspiracy theory to me.
Well, it's their, they're going to worry about their water because it's coming to them. Yeah, well, whatever, you can call it a conspiracy.
No, but you're now giving mixed messages, because our water is not. You've already said it. The catchment right? Their water's going to them. That's fine. But our water would still be coming to us, even if head office was in Christchurch. That's the point I'm trying to make. Our water's still coming down from Queenstown, even if Christchurch is where the head office is, and the Alps' water is going down to Christchurch. And Nelson, so they're not getting our water. They've no vested interest in our water because our water is still coming down to us from our catchments. Theirs is to theirs from their catchment. What have they got to do with how our water gets delivered to us if we're getting our water, whether head office is in Dunedin or in Christchurch?
Well, less is the answer to that. They'll have less to do with it. So,
but also, surely you see the same. Surely you see the same argument could be made by people in Invercargill. I mean, they could make it. The same argument could be made by people in Invercargill for what you're suggesting is the answer.
That's right.
So where does that leave us?
Well, that we've got a long history of having a closer attachment to Invercargill, and it's a shorter distance, and things can be done within a day. So in terms of emergency responsiveness and responsiveness to whatever issues are going on, and in terms of sharing of resources, it's far more logistically feasible to do that within the catchment, as well as everyone being concerned about the same bodies and channels of water.
So are you saying that things could be done within a day, which is what you just said, because of the distance?
Yeah.
Because I'm struggling to think why all of a sudden 220 kilometres to Invercargill means things can be done in a day, yet 350 kilometres to Christchurch means, no, it's too much. It's going to take weeks. My paraphrase, you haven't said that.
Well, I just think, look, I've already stated it, quite clearly, and I just think you might as well just centralise it all to Wellington, and then they look after everything. And there's a strong move within this government to do that, and I have not seen any particular evidence of improved efficiencies from central control. So. And so moving conglomeration of management and administration assets within what feels like a natural boundary and a natural area, and that doesn't, that can be for all sorts of things, does seem like to my observation, seems like a better way to do it.
I guess the last thing I'll say, not necessarily about this exact topic, but about the example you're giving, right? When you say, well, if we're going to go that path, we might as well just go centralizing everything. The equal and opposite would also be true. What are we saying then? If everything was localized, it would be better. If we're going to keep water localized, we might as well go that way and make everything localized. At the moment, there are things to do with public funding, whether it's teachers or whether it's whatever that is centrally governed and it works. So I guess I struggle a little bit to think if it goes central, it's going to be terrible. And if it stays local, it's going to be good, because there is some stuff that we get the enjoyment of locally that is centralized. There's other things that aren't centralized. So as I said 3 or 4 minutes ago, the question is, would this be better if it was centralized? You're saying no, it wouldn't. And I guess we'll be left with that.
It's not black and white. And so, I mean, you're putting up the black and white choice, but it's not a black and white argument, and every situation is nuanced. So, we've got Otago and Southland Polytechnics that were doing extremely well and cooperating with each other extremely well, and now they've been subsumed into a central government model, and there's a great deal of disillusionment now within the Polytech. So it's not necessarily the case that everything works well centrally, and it's not necessarily the case that everything works well locally. And there's lots of nuance in every decision, but my key point is coming back to what is the natural boundary that the natural area for some particular thing, and what is that based on? And I'm saying that I think Three Waters is a catchment issue because it's about water, which rises and it arrives on the planet in a particular area and is distributed to the other areas. There's network connectivity through the natural rivers. And so having and using the natural boundary of a wider catchment is a sensible way and a natural way, and it's a good engineering way to administer the assets administer the engineering, because it's all about engineering really, of the supply.
So I'd finished that conversation, but I do have one more question for you, and it only requires a yes or a no answer. Really does. Sure. So Nanaimo Huta phones you today, and you are again the current Three Waters model, and the Naya says, Jules, what we're going to do, we've decided, is we're going to change this to catchment areas. And the Nanaimo Huta goes, that means for the South Island there's going to be 3, and for the North Island there's going to be 5. So we're going to move away from 63 councils to now 8. Would you support that?
Or 12 or whatever.
Whatever.
Sure. And then we start the conversation about all the other nuance.
But so you would support Three Waters if it were 10 or...
No. Then we start the conversation about the other nuance angles of the Three Waters proposals. So, that's one.
So you wouldn't say...
So that covers off that. So I would say, yes, I support that as a logical area to have now, to work through the next steps of the Three Waters debate.
We've only got about 5 minutes left. Can you tell us what the next steps are in 60 seconds or less? Like, what are the other headings underneath the catchment areas? What are the 1 or 2 other things that you would need to see figured out before you said yes to it? And if you can't do it in 60 seconds, we'll move on. But if you can, I'd be more than happy to hear it.
It's pretty simple.
Yep.
Who owns the assets?
Yeah.
And who controls the assets?
Yeah.
That's it. There you go.
Well, if the model was the same, but it was smaller, which means the boards are going to be made up of people from Dunedin and Otago, I think that would be the controls. Same model, but Otago, Dunedin people. Would that tick the box yes for you?
For who controls the assets, yeah, that would tick that box.
And what was the last one?
Who owns the assets?
Well, I guess both councils.
Yeah, well, that's right. So it still remains in local control. Yeah, and then that would tick that box. Yeah.
Done. So we just found a way to work with Three Waters. Let's sort that out, Jules. Right, let's wrap up.
They've said exactly the same to the local politicians, the local Labour Party politicians.
According to the ODT, a trio of retiring Dunedin City Councillors say the city has been progressing nicely. Quote, why do you think you're the best mayor? Why do you think we should change the mayor at the moment when people, certainly within council, are saying we're going pretty well at the moment? Why is there a need for a change? Why are you that person?
Well, public satisfaction with the mayor and councillors has halved since the current mayor's been in office, and employment growth has plummeted similarly. And so we are, the situation, and that's contrary to other, no other New Zealand metros have suffered the job losses as we have. So things are, not going that great in Dunedin. There's a lot of dissatisfaction. And this whole plan to take us back to the 50s force us onto buses by shutting down the town to vehicular traffic when most people own a car and need a car to get around, because we're a very large city spread over, a big area with not that huge a population, means that we're having a lot of things being imposed upon the citizenry, which they clearly do not want. So it's time for a change, and it's time to take the citizens' views into account, and I will do that with what I call constant korero. So active listening, taking positive action as a result, and looking after our community.
And I guess finally, it's probably a dovetail to that same question. Maybe you've already answered it, but if you want to expand on it, why are you the best person to be the mayor for Dunedin moving forward?
Because I've had a lifetime of team building and of business experience, of practicality and actually doing things. So I've spent the last 14 years as a business coach, helping other business owners get their businesses tuned up. And one of the things that needs to happen with council is to have it tuned up so that we have some fiscal prudence being exercised. But, I'm still, very keen to progress the city. But we need to have a vibrant economy. It's my vision, and it's our shared vision in Team Dunedin to have Dunedin that is welcoming, vibrant, and sustainable.
Is it fair to assume, should you win mayor, then you come as a package with a co-mayor? Andrew Wiley would be your deputy because he's your teammate on Team Dunedin?
No, that's not fair to assume.
Okay. Do you have anyone lined up that you think they would be, should they get in, they would be a good person to be your deputy?
No, that decision, should I be mayor, that decision will be made when the time comes. There's no point in, working through that at this stage because nobody knows who will be elected.
I wonder about that because obviously I'm sure Andrew's like, oh, well, cool. He'd be mayor, I'd be councillor, I'd be deputy. Yay. So you might have a bit of an awkward conversation with him should you get elected, which is where we're going to leave it.
We've already had the conversation.
Good. All right, Jules. Hey, look, best of with the run leading up to the election second week of October. I think voting actually starts Monday week for people who want to get in early. I think that's when it actually starts. Thank you for giving some time to us
starts
today.
On Friday, the same day that the papers are sent out, but not many people will receive them on Friday.
So so 6 days from now, 7 days, 6 days from now.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe that Friday, that's when voting opens and that's when papers are sent out. But how people will receive them on Friday, I don't know. I don't expect that will be the case. More likely, you say, receive them on Monday. Yeah.
Councillor Jules Radich. Jules, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time, and hopefully people watching and to watch this in the future will get something from this as to who you are. Would you be mayor? So we appreciate your time.
Thanks, Pat. That's great.